Hi guys, welcome to WalkThroughCode. My name is John. So let's go ahead and get started here. So in this video we are going to talk about Redux, and I was going back and forth of whether I was going to make a diagram because of how many freaking diagrams are out there. But I figure, if you can follow my thought process and the way that I think about it, then that might make this course a little bit better. So the premise of Redux is to remove the state from the application itself and put it outside and make it reachable by any component that needs it. The benefit to this is basically that instead of having to pass down props through multiple components, 3, 4, even 5 components is ridiculous, and it's redundant data, and it just doesn't need it's not dry at all, and it's just not a good way to write your code on. And it's difficult to not do that on larger scale applications. One could argue that for a very small, like maybe like a 2-layer React application, Redux might be a little bit overkill, whereas some people believe that Redux any app anytime. I'm going to let you make that decision, but the premise, so the premise is that any component anywhere in the tree can access the store should it require something from the store. So let's talk about how the life cycle of Redux and kind of what happens. In this particular contrived example is that the user is going to have an input button that's going to have them input some to-dos, or a to-do I should say, and then click the submit button, at which time that will be added to a list below. We aren't mentioning the list below explicitly, but it's just to give you a little bit of backstory. So inside of the view, the user, let's say that the user types something in and they click the submit button. What happens there is it goes into this file full of actions, and it basically fires off this function, this export const add new to do function that takes a new to do as a parameter, which we're probably sending in through that click event based on that submit button that we had. And we are sending the new to do as the payload, or here is the argument that's passed in. This is the parameter at the end anyway. That said, this function returns this object containing a type and a payload property. This itself is the action. This function is the action creator. So what's happening here is that we are firing this function. We're giving the new to do as a payload for when the action gets fired or when the action is sent to the reducer. Now that moves us on to the reducer. So the reducer is without too much clout around it. It's a function that contains a switch statement that goes and looks for a particular type. In this case, we have add to do. A quick aside, the reason why this is a variable instead of just typing the string in here is for, it's not anything that you have to do, but I will tell you it is extremely easy to misspell or miscase something, and if you assign this to a variable, the autocomplete will catch it for you, or the IntelliSense or whatever you call it. Anyway, so this reducer is a function with a switch statement that looks at the type and says which one is it. In this case, we only have one because there's only one possible. But we could have an add to do, remove to do, an edit to do, and all that stuff, and all those would have a case by themselves. So we are in this function. We are setting an initial state. We are setting an initial state and to just an array, because we're going to have an array of to dos, and we want to add that to do to the array. We set, using ES6 default parameters, we set this with just a state equals initial state. Arguably, we could just put that array in there, so state equals an array. That's a style choice. I generally tend to use it that way, but this way is completely fine too. Also, we're passing in the action, which is this particular object here. So then it looks in that object and it says, based on the action.type that I receive, if it's this add to do, take the existing state, put it in there, and then add action.payload. Note here that we have an array here, so we're actually returning a new array. That's one of the things about Redux. Redux is all about immutability, right? You can't mutate anything directly. If you do that, it may fail silently, but you'll note that if you do mutate something, then what will happen is it won't actually re-render. That took me a little bit to figure out. So if your component if your app doesn't re-render, check your reducer to make sure that you're not inadvertently mutating something. So that returns the new version of state, and we'll talk about the store in a second. You might be asking yourself, so what happens when the app first starts up, right? So what happens is this action is undefined, and it basically just fires the default, so it just returns just an empty array, and that'll just let the app start by itself without issue. So after something is returned from this function, or returns from this reducer, I should say, it takes all the results of the reducers. There could be more than one reducer. Let's say you have one for to-dos and one for users or something like that, that you can add a user, remove a user, etc. What happens is basically the results from all of those reducers are thrown together and basically created a new version of global. You could call it global app state, store state, etc. And then what happens then is that a new version of the store is created, and all of the results from the reducers are injected into the said store. At which point you'll oftentimes see middleware added, like a logger or a side effect middleware or something to that effect. And then what happens after that new store is created is that the React/Redux goes through all of the components to see what has changed, but only re-renders the components that were directly affected by the store state change. And then once that happens, everything is re-rendered, and then the cycle starts all over again. So I hope that was helpful. That's kind of how I think about it. The code can get a little bit, how to say this kindly, there's just a lot of boilerplate, and that can be intimidating quite a bit at first, but if you persist and just kind of try to look at high level what everything does rather than trying to understand on the deepest level, which is great if that's something you want to do, but when you're first starting, I would say just understand it from like a 30,000 foot view, and everything as you write this 5 million times will definitely get easier. Thank you guys so much again for watching. If you have any questions or comments or anything, totally leave them in the comment section below. Please like and subscribe. I love making videos for you guys. And what can I say? Have an awesome day.